Thank you all for joining us for this webinar. I'm Chelsea Thomas, Executive Director of ACT the App Association, and we're excited to have Doug Miller, co-founder of Zero Labs, and Alexis Normand, CEO and co-founder of Greenly, here to talk about what small businesses need to know about global carbon reporting guidelines. As many of you know, governments around the world are ramping up their efforts to combat climate change, and they're looking at establishing the regulatory framework to do just that. Here in the US, the Security and Exchange Commission's climate rules are currently subject to litigation, and California is setting the pace for state action. The European Council approved the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive as well, and jurisdictions around the globe are considering how to integrate the International Sustainability Standard Board reporting standards into their disclosure regimes. With all of this government activity on climate reporting, I'm excited to hear from our member companies about the ways in which small businesses can learn about what they'll be required to do and be prepared to navigate the regulatory labyrinth on the horizon. Let's get started with some introductions. Let's start with you, Alexis. You started Greenly in 2019, and it's been steadily growing since then. Tell us a little bit about Greenly and why you decided to start it.
Sure. So, so we're now a 220 employee company, right? Above 10 million annual recurring revenue, servicing about 2,500 companies on their carbon accounting needs. We started 5 years ago. We were an app to help individuals track their carbon footprint. I came from the quantified self world, and I believe that if you want to change something, you have to measure it, and you have to create short-term incentives to nudge you into changing your behavior, getting short-term rewards, all those things. When I started out, what I didn't know is that, individuals were worried about climate change. They cared about their carbon footprint, but it was super abstract and didn't have that much market pressure to do it. So 6 months to a year into founding the company, we realized we'd have a lot more impact by pivoting essentially to first SMBs and then mid-market companies. And essentially helping them out with an urgent need that they had, which is to report their emissions. And now not everybody experiences this, but when companies work in B2B for enterprise as suppliers, they very often get that request, kind of like, show me how good you are on data security. Increasingly, and of course I think it's a good thing, they're getting the pressure on, okay, what are your emissions? And it's a kind of trickle down effect from, okay, you've got these regulations that are hitting big companies and they need to show targets and decarbonization roadmaps and so on. And the way that they achieve their targets is also by getting their supply chain on board. So I'll stop there, but we went from an idea, you have to quantify your carbon, to figuring out that this actually brought a lot of value to companies, and of course, building a whole platform around this idea. The world did not wait for Greenly to address carbon accounting. It existed before, but the way it was done before was essentially through consulting, which, they're doing a great job, but they're doing a great job for large companies, enterprise. And most SMEs, most mid-market companies were priced out of this. And we anticipated that, this would become something everybody was going to do. So you needed to reduce the pain out of it, which is, of course, the price, but also the pain of collecting a lot of data, analyzing it, a lot of which can go away through the right automations. And I'll stop there, but it kind of gives you an overview.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Doug, for the past 10 years, you've focused your professional career on green tech and clean energy projects. What led you to co-founding Zero Labs?
Well, first, Chelsea, thanks for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be here. And also as somebody who grew up in a household of small business owners, so it's excited for this discussion. So I've been working in clean energy and the technology space my entire career. And essentially my work is focused on how do we make climate action and clean energy easier. So whether that's developing new technologies, new tools, other resources, that's been the core of what I've spent my time and attention on the past decade plus. And in terms of what led to the idea that became Zero Labs, essentially about 5 or so years ago, I was working at a nonprofit called Energy Web, which had spun out of a different nonprofit called Rocky Mountain Institute, RMI. And essentially, the premise of Energy Web was, what is the role of this new technology? It was new at the time, blockchain, for the energy transition specifically. And essentially, over the course of a couple of years and doing research and developing new open source technology, looking at the role of blockchain as part of the software components for new digital solutions in the energy space, my department discovered an idea for using blockchain specifically for renewable energy certificate markets, renewable RECs in the US case. And essentially, we were doing some R&D and arrived at this idea where the premise of the idea was essentially, how do we make it easier for all companies, whether it's multinational corporations or SMEs like yourselves, to actually participate in global clean energy markets where imagine a future where you could click a few buttons and then purchase clean energy no matter where your office is, and then get the proof you need to prove that you as a business have reduced your emissions. And then similarly, to make clean energy more of a more communicable, something that you can share and engage your suppliers and your own customers around. And so essentially with all these ideas, we launched Zero Labs about 2.5 years ago, and I know we'll be talking more about the work we're doing later. But I think it's interesting that as a startup, every startup has a different story, that we spun out of essentially a nonprofit and doing work about how to make best use of new technologies for, in this case, clean energy.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We're really grateful to have you both here. And at the App Association, our goal is to help provide small businesses with the information that they need to be able to comply with regulations. And as we're moving more and more into sort of a global regulatory environment, thinking about all of these different moving pieces. Alexis, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, there are numerous efforts around the world to rein in carbon emissions in all manner of industries, right? But for the first time, there seem to be some concrete requirements for reporting in Europe and California, among other potential markets. I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive that goes into effect in 2025 and California's Climate-Related Financial Risk Act.
Sure. There are many regulations around the world, right? In Europe, in the US, in Japan, that all say more or less the same thing. Companies a certain size need to report their emissions along like standardized categories. I don't know how familiar the audience is with all of this, but it's scope 1, direct emissions, what comes out of you essentially burning fossil fuels, gas or oil, in your factory, in your company-owned cars, these kind of things. Scope 2, which is your indirect emissions linked to you using energy from, say, utilities, so they're burning fossil fuels as part of your electricity consumption. And then scope 3, which is everything else from essentially your supply chain. So it's not you releasing emissions, but it's linked to your purchase of goods and services, essentially, and other categories that are doing it. So what these regulations say is you now have to track this. There are regulations. There's a regulation in the US, right, with the SEC that says companies that are listed on the stock exchange will need to report their scope 1 and 2 as of next year. Of course, we'll see what happens with the elections, right? But we can imagine that somewhere down the line, this will be generalized all the way up to scope 3. You have the SB 253, so Senate Bill 253 in California, that says, look, any company that makes more than $1 billion of turnover worldwide and $1 at least in California will have to report their scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions. So relatively big businesses, but they don't have to do that much business in California. So it's a state legislation, but it has effects on, way beyond California, because the company could be anywhere in the US and still have to comply. And then you mentioned that you have the EU regulation. So you already had a number of national regulations on carbon accounting, but now with the CSRD says is that any company that has more than 500 employees or more than 40 million euros in turnover or more than 20 million euros in assets will have to report their KPIs on their environmental, social, and governance impact. So notice the threshold: 1 billion in California, 40 million euros in Europe. So I don't want to do a stupid calculation, but the threshold is 20 fold lower, right? So it's you're talking about maybe 5,000 companies in the California that are concerned. You're talking about 60,000 companies that are concerned in the EU. And it's also extraterritorial in nature, because if you're a US company that fits where your EU business fits these criteria, you are concerned as well. So it's about 5,000 US companies that will have to do it. And so what is this? CSRD is broader than just carbon, but it says, look, you have to do what we call a materiality assessment. So how am I impacted by things around the environment, and how am I impacting the environment? So you look at a number of KPIs, things, and once you have conducted that assessment, you report on that information. So you're not going to have to report on everything. You're going to have to report on stuff that's essentially relevant to your industry. So most companies will have to report on their carbon emissions as part of CSRD. And so it's actually an application since this year, but it's next year, 2025, that companies will have to report on 2024 emissions. And as of 2026, companies with 250 employees will have to report as well. So lowering the bar even further. Not to speak too long on this topic, we can see a kind of disconnect in terms of how much weight is put on all this reporting on in the US versus Europe. I think it could be a tendency to see Europe as overburdening companies with a lot of reporting. But maybe I'm preaching from my own parish in saying so, because that's what Greenlead does. But I think the argument we're trying to make is it doesn't have to be a lot of reporting. It has to be a process whereby companies are able to do this in the most seamless way, without and then creating value based on essentially being more sustainable. And so the cost to complying is something that is actually much lower than the cost of, say, complying with your financial disclosure obligations. And I'll stop there.
Excellent, thank you. I think that raises a really good point when you're talking about the process. And I'm wondering, Doug, if you can break down the basics of that process of clean energy accounting and the differences between scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions for the sake of that reporting, and what a business might be able to do to comply.
Absolutely. Well, just briefly to build on what Alexis just shared too. Essentially, the purpose of this reporting is really to help companies like yourselves identify hotspots for where you can reduce emissions. And then once you understand the hotspots, better understand how and where you can reduce those emissions. And so I know Alexis briefly mentioned this, but just to summarize, there are 3 categories of emissions that you will have to keep track of. Scope 1 is, are you burning anything on site? Do you have ovens? Do you have kitchens? Do you have other things where there's a smokestack essentially on your site? Many small businesses, maybe not necessarily the case unless you're manufacturing or a restaurant. Scope 2 is where it is probably the most applicable, and it's to most of you, if not all of you. It's essentially, are you consuming electricity, where the emissions there are based on how carbon intensive the electric grid is multiplied by how much electricity you consume. For that scope 2, there are two main ways to reduce your emissions. One is to invest in efficiency, reduce your energy use. Option 2 is to decarbonize your electricity use through purchasing clean energy. And this is where Zero Labs can be helpful. I'll come back to that later. The third category, scope 3, is everything else. It's a catch-all. It's everything from the emissions associated with your supplies to the emissions associated with any travel, how your staff get to work, how customers use your products. And where I think it's really interesting is there are different categories of scope 3 emissions. Some are easier to take action on, some are harder because they're less in your control. The area where Zero Labs focuses and where I would encourage at least many of you to think about is the role of the energy use, or in other words, the scope 2 of your suppliers and customers, because that's a place where you can either on behalf of your suppliers or customers, or in collaboration with them, help them procure clean energy. And so I think that's a long way of saying that one of the easiest places to start in terms of these hotspots for where you can reduce emissions is to procure clean energy after any efficiency measures, and then encouraging your suppliers and customers to also procure clean energy. And as a bit of a preview of where this discussion is going, this is how exciting software tools like Greenly and Zero Labs could come together for someone like you, where on one end you have the carbon accounting, the big picture view, and then on the other, the tools to actually take to reduce your emissions and report that to your stakeholders, whether it's customers, policymakers, et cetera. So I'll stop there.
Excellent. I think what's interesting is sort of the staged applicability based on size of company. And I'm interested to hear from both of you why this is something that small businesses should pay attention to. If you're listening to this webinar and you're like, well, I'm a small company, I don't meet any of these thresholds, why do I need to care? That's phase 1 of the question. And then phase 2 is like, are these regulations really intended to apply to SMEs? It could be service-based businesses needing to help their enterprise clients report scope 3 emissions, or you're just looking to grow your market share because you are, complying and having good green conduct. So I'm curious, if I could hear from both of you, why should small businesses care?
Yeah, I mean, look, their customers care. So if you're a B2C brand, right? We were at Sustainable Brands Conference last week. So, increasingly customers decide which brand they're working with based on how seriously they take climate change as a problem. So if you're gonna have a phone, maybe you want the one from the company that's taking the issue of their impact the most seriously, right? If you're gonna have shoes, it's the same thing. And so increasingly, B2C companies will voluntarily disclose their impact, and usually they will do so in a way that they show progress, because nobody's good in absolute terms on this topic. It's more about what are we doing to get better? I mean, that's an important first point. But now these tends to be relatively bigger companies. You also have the effect of these large companies making certain pledges about how they're going to get to net zero at one point. And to get that working, because of the way that emissions computation is done, right? I outlined that you have scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. So scope 3 is essentially your suppliers. So if I am, say, Microsoft, and I have pledged to reduce my emissions by 50% by 2030, for instance, the only way I'm going to be able to do this is by getting my suppliers on board. And you don't have to be a big company to be a Microsoft supplier, a US Army supplier, a Walmart supplier. And this impacts so it's essentially embedded into these larger companies' RFP processes whereby they will, of course, cost matters, features matter, all those things, but sustainability matters more and more. And what we've observed is that there's a kind of contagion effect there, whereby, if a big company asks for a vendor and nobody's positioned on sustainability, then nobody needs to be. But as soon as you have one that says, look, I do everything that my competitors are doing and better, but on top of all of this, I have a real climate strategy and I'm going to contribute to your own, then they win business. And when they win business, they take their whole sector along, meaning all their competitors suddenly realize that's become a closed lost reason. And so, I mean, depending on who's listening to us, they might feel concerned or not right now, but I can tell you, we've seen this effect expand at a speed you wouldn't imagine. It's true, it's more of a social norm now in Europe than it is in the US, but it's happening there too. Maybe just not quite at the same pace.
Excellent. Doug, anything that you would like to add?
Yeah, maybe just to build, I mean, I think everything there makes a lot of sense. And I think more and more companies are in fact asking their suppliers, including small business suppliers, to actually provide to reduce their emissions and prove it. And so I think maybe the main thing to add is that these corporations are looking for the evidence that you did in fact reduce emissions. And this is where different technology tools can be helpful, where, for example, you can show that if, let's say, you did in fact procure renewable energy to reduce your scope 2 emissions, so your electricity emissions, and you want to communicate that to your downstream corporate customer to help them understand how you helped them reduce their scope 3 emissions, there are tools available like ours that help you actually show that not only you procured renewables to neutralize or decarbonize your scope 2 emissions, but that you've allocated or signed that environmental claim to your customer. Because there is a concern too, as we enter this world of more and more companies sharing information with each other about how they're respectively reducing emissions, there's this concern over what's called double claims. So the issue there is, for example, that let's say you are a supplier, just to continue with the Microsoft example. Let's say you're a supplier to both Microsoft and Amazon, two companies that have goals to reduce their scope 3 emissions. If you, for example, communicated to Microsoft that you reduced your emissions, but maybe just your emissions associated with Microsoft, without sufficient tools and documentation, if you wanted to communicate that proof to Amazon as well, they might be concerned that you are kind of double counting or double claiming the same renewable energy units to both. And so there are interesting ways and tools available now so that you can communicate to both that you procured renewable energy, assigned that renewable energy claim to both Amazon and Microsoft, so that not only your books are in order for how you've reduced your scope 2, but that also their books are in order because they have the confirmation that their relationship with you has been decarbonized. And so I think we're kind of getting into the weeds here, but I think this is an interesting point just because with where things are going, now that climate-related disclosures are regulatory disclosures, you will want to have these paper trails in place. And looping back to some of my earlier comments, this is the role of on our end of having a blockchain-based component in the back end that helps you provide that full validation about how you are allocating or assigning these environmental claims to different stakeholders. One other point too is that in general, on top of the environmental benefits and the relationship with your customers, this of course will depend on your team, your CFO or your financial advisor and tax advisors. But I think there's also an interesting case to be made that actions and services and solutions that you may procure to reduce your emissions could be treated as a reasonable business deductible expense. So in other words, if you spend X amount of dollars per year in renewable energy certificates, in carbon offsets, in other services to help you manage your emissions, I think there is a case that you could argue that this is an expense just like business travel, just like your supplies, et cetera, to reduce your tax burden. And so there's this, and this is different than it's not a subsidy. This is just existing deductions. And I think there could be an interesting case here for how you get the internal support to move emission reduction actions ahead. It's kind of a win-win, potential tax benefit and then potential, well, benefits for your customers too.
Excellent. And that goes a little ways toward answering my next question, but I'll ask it anyway, and then if there are any additional pieces that we could fold in. I'm looking at the crystal ball and trying to see the future. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about how these regulations and developing regulations in other markets like the UK and Australia and procurement related pressures that you touched on a little bit could influence the way small businesses are going to approach carbon reporting in the future.
Yeah, so it's not just EU or US thing, right? I mean, most major economies have regulations on this, right? So the UK version is called the SCCR. I can't remember what the acronym stands for, and the Japanese have it too. I think what's super important though is to understand that companies are a certain size, they're all global. And so you have this extraterritorial effect of these regulations. So if you want to do business with the EU, you're going to have to comply when you're a certain size with CSRD, same with UK, same with Japan, same with California, right? Super important. One regulation that I didn't mention, which is super interesting to talk about, is the CBAM. So, oh my God, another acronym, right? But CBAM stands for Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. So back in I believe 2005, but I may be wrong, the EU implemented a carbon trading scheme, which says like all the 11,000 super high polluting sites doing cement, fertilizer, metal molding and these kind of things, metal production, needed to essentially be taxed on the emissions per ton of CO2, right? And it's a thing where it's a cap and trade system where you have a certain price of the kilogram or ton of CO2, and you can pay the tax or find a project that reduces emissions. So it's and so one of the effects of that regulation is that a lot of the high emission businesses actually started happening in places like China. So your aluminium plant went to Dubai or to China, your cement factory, all these things. So in a sense, the scheme wasn't really reducing emissions. It was just displacing them. And as we know, of course, climate change is a global problem. So it's not really helping if we're emitting just as much in China. So now what the EU has said is, look, for all these, there's a list of 6 items that are super high emissions. So cement, fertilizers, aluminium, and I think steel, and sorry, I might be missing a few. I'd have to look them up, easy to find. If you're importing a product and has a lot of that, so like a spare part for a car or whatever, you're gonna have to report on this, and it's not a tax per se, but it's just like one. You're gonna pay the extra fee that you would have paid had you produced this in Europe to level up the competition, so to speak. So what that means is every company exporting manufactured goods with metal, cement, or fertilizers is going to have to declare the carbon footprint of its product. So it's global effects. because the EU is like a huge market for most established companies, irrespective of your business. So it means everybody's going to start tracking the carbon footprint of its product and how much of that footprint is impacted by some of these 6 components. So that's major, and it means you're not just disclosing the footprint of your organization, you're disclosing the footprint of your product.
Absolutely.
And so even if Trump gets elected, US companies will have to do it if they want to keep doing business with the EU.
All right. Doug, to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things. First, just on the carbon border policy discussion. On one end, the US is exploring similar regulation. So there are several competing bills that have been drafted right now in the United States that will look at developing a similar carbon border fee on this side of the Atlantic. And I would be surprised if other countries around the globe didn't develop similar policies. And I think at the end of the day, how and where this impacts small businesses is, again, having that general understanding of what your emissions are, and then having the plan and the tools where you start reducing your emissions just so you can get ahead of the curve. Because at the end of the day, if you take action to reduce emissions, you have the proof, you're in a better position than those who are not in that position. And I think one other crystal ball point to bring up is that, as folks who are listening and may know, there are a couple of standards that are changing right now. They continue to change, both in terms of the Science-Based Targets, Science-Based Targets Initiative, SBTI, and the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. Essentially, some of the both goal-setting frameworks and then the frameworks that actually help inform how you do the math for your carbon accounting. Those are in flux right now, which adds another moving target alongside the regulatory changes that are happening. So it's a lot to juggle. But I think what's important to mention here is that the outcome of these different processes that are underway to change standards, the main thing that may change is how much different actions count to reduce your emissions. At the end of the day, if you are taking measures to invest in energy conservation and energy efficiency technologies to reduce your energy use, if you are procuring clean energy, if you are taking other measures around commuting, around being smart with who your suppliers are, et cetera, and you have the documentation to prove what you've done, this is the way to get ahead. And ultimately, if you can communicate, for example, what percentage of your facilities are powered with clean energy, even if some of the accounting rules change a bit, you can still make that claim. So I'm trying to spare some of the details because it's easy to go down some rabbit holes in these topics. But I think these are some important points for small business owners and staff to know about.
Excellent. Thank you. And I think that you can't really talk about the future without also talking about tech, right? And so I'm curious if you can talk about how tech is influencing this conversation. Should companies be considering the carbon footprint of emerging technologies like artificial intelligence or blockchain? Like how should people be incorporating that in their calculations?
Yeah, my favorite topic, Chelsea. So, well, of course, I mean, AI is not going to go away. We all measure super intuitively how much time it saves, on basic productivity stuff around producing text and so on, or archiving or reading through large quantities of data. That doesn't mean we should discard its carbon footprint. It's massive. It's massive because if you think about the footprint of AI, right? It's fundamentally the data centers that power them for training and for like queries, basically. And the massive amounts that you hear these companies, these AI companies raising is essentially spent on compute, right? And compute are essentially machines that run on electricity. So at Greenly, we know about this because we help a lot of tech companies track their footprint. And so we've developed a specialty around their cloud emissions. And cloud emissions is, I mean, conceptually, it's relatively easy to understand how you compute it. So AI or not AI, if you're using a cloud, you have to measure how much electricity your usage generates. So it's really easy. There's a quantity of kilowatt hour per minute of vCPU, GPU, or virtual CPU consumption, right? And that you get on AWS or Azure or Google Cloud bills. So you know exactly how much of each instance you've consumed. And we translate this into electricity. And once you have a lot of electricity, well, it's footprint because it either goes to a maybe gas turbine or a coal power plant or a nuclear power plant. And maybe a simple figure, AWS, Google, and Amazon all had net zero plans, and they all saw their emissions surge by 30% last year. So it was going down and it suddenly spiked up because of it's a real thing. And it's such a big thing that it's putting pressure on the electricity grid. So if you think about what the energy transition means, right? IPCC report summed up in 2 sentences: electrify everything and make the energy as clean as you can. So now you have something that's very electrical and is, in a sense, competing with other things that need to be electrified. So it could slow down or accelerate the energy transition. What we're seeing, I think, is pretty positive. We're seeing these hyperscalers invest in nuclear energy, which is not totally low carbon, but which is really low carbon versus, say, gas or coal. So in a sense, they might accelerate nuclear energy. Of course, low carbon energy is in the short term mostly renewables. So solar, wind, hydro. Um, uh, but just to say, right now, they are probably not doing this to save the energy transition. They are doing this because business will stall if they don't have the electricity that they need to keep growing. And so nuclear energy, so the carbon footprint of AI today without extra renewable energy is massively increasing. And it's massively increasing because you've got players like AWS. If I take Europe as an example, most of their data centers are in Ireland, which is a great country, but it has a very carbon intensive energy mix. Mostly gas and coal power running that the data centers are running on, 500 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. You move this data to Switzerland, France, Belgium, or Sweden, it's 30 grams of CO2. So you divide the footprint by 10. So that's if you're a startup or a dev or whoever, and you want to reduce the footprint of your cloud or your AI, you essentially choose to put your data in a country with low carbon energy. But if you're Google, you have your data farms everywhere, so you choose to buy a nuclear facility, basically. So that's the I think in a nutshell what you need to know about the footprint of AI. It needs to run on low carbon energy, which is not the case today so much.
So I can add to that by, on one end, talking about why AI and blockchain are not special and why they are special as it relates to climate action and the energy transition. So in a previous role, I launched what was called the Crypto Climate Accord, and similar ideas are directly relevant to AI. Essentially, where blockchain and AI are not special is they consume electricity. So just to some of Alexis's points, if we reached a future point where the entire electric grid was carbon free, which lots of us both of us are working in to grow demand for renewable energy and to decarbonize the grid, were the grid carbon free, it wouldn't necessarily matter, at least to a certain extent, if electricity use grew, because at least it would not be emitting carbon. And so there is an opportunity to treat all new AI electricity use and all blockchain related electricity use essentially as a clean energy buyer. So right now, in case you're not aware, there are several hundred major companies, so multinationals who are buying clean energy every year, essentially one for one with their electricity use, where if they're consuming X amount of electricity per year, they're buying X amount of renewable energy and have the renewable energy certificates to prove it. There's an opportunity and to essentially leverage all this growing electricity use associated with AI and historically blockchain as a new source of demand, sending those demand signals to help boost the revenue and bankability of clean energy products around the globe. And so that's where on one these two technologies are not special. They're just a source of electricity, but they can serve as a new source of energy demand. Luckily, lots of the companies who are leading the development of these technologies already have climate commitments, are already procuring clean energy, perhaps not at the pace that they were expecting a year ago. So now they have a bit of catching up to do to decarbonize their growing electricity use. But I think that's a really important point. In terms of where these technologies are special and maybe can play a role, is on one end, at least as it relates to blockchain, we at Zero Labs use blockchain as part of the back end of our software to help validate that if you bought some renewable energy certificates to decarbonize your energy use, the ability to show that you've assigned some component of that or share of that to this customer, to that customer, essentially providing that traceability at a deeper level to communicate the precise environmental claim that you are assigning to different value chain partners of yours. And so it provides that granular claim that more and more people are looking at, especially as they have to do reporting to regulators and want to stand behind the claims they make. As it relates to AI, this is a newer area for us and others, of course. On one end, AI is helpful to arrive at energy-related estimates more quickly, so to better understand how much clean energy should I buy to decarbonize my emissions from my scope 2 or the scope 2 of my partners. You can use AI tools to at least get a first draft of that. Another last angle to consider is if AI really is just it's a new form of software programming language and so forth, there could be ways to essentially integrate climate action, say automatically buy clean energy based on how different downstream products and services leverage AI. What I mean by that is imagine if an AI-based software is leading to different operational decisions by machinery at factories, facilities, et cetera, downstream. If all of those things downstream consume electricity, you could add to the software language rules or requirements to say, if this thing that the business process does using AI consumes electricity, automatically buy clean energy based on that and send them proof. And these are some of the exciting scenarios that we're looking at.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, to wrap things up, I would love for both of you to have the chance to talk a bit about what your companies do, especially for small businesses, and how our participants can learn more about the work that you're doing.
So quickly, because I alluded to it, so we help carbon accounting and in general environmental reporting. We help these companies make it intuitive and precise. So essentially fast tracking the disclosure of their emissions, especially if they needed to transform their own companies or simply to report for business purposes. In all cases, it's a first step to rolling out a climate strategy, and we'll go all the way to helping them out formalize their reduction actions, submitting what we call an SBTI strategy, so Science-Based Target Initiative. How do you quantify how you're going to reduce your emissions? And also, of course, we help companies report on CSRD when they are eligible.
Excellent. And Doug?
Yeah, so Zero Labs, we provide clean energy as a service. And so essentially we can help firms like yourselves very easily procure clean energy, even if you consume very little amounts of electricity every year. Part of our technology tool is to buy in bulk and use blockchain technology to deliver the respective part of those large orders that you own. And so we can help you achieve an emission reduction goal that you have. and then also communicate the evidence digitally to any of your customers, your suppliers, other stakeholders you may have. I think you may receive information from from the App Association after this event, and I can share some more details alongside that. But I would love to have a conversation with you and can share some more links. But essentially, we can help you buy clean energy out of the box and achieve your goals and have everything in a easy to use digital platform. So you can just weave it into the rest of the work you're already doing. So you don't have to hire more people, hire more consultants necessarily. And the last point is that if you wanted to go with both Greenly and Zero Labs, there would be a way for all of the systems to come together. So
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Do you have any closing thoughts before we wrap up completely?
Look, I mean, even if you're an app developer, you should think about these topics. So, I mean, look, the energy transition, we're talking about it mildly, and as if all things were all good and well, but it's something you need to mentally project yourself in 2050 and say, what should I have done to mitigate this? I don't want to sound alarmist or anything, but it's really a disaster coming our way. So, and it's the only thing that people are going to be talking about in the next 30 years. So the faster you align your career choices or your company pathway towards the energy transition, the likelier you are to make it an opportunity and not something that's going to sweep your company away. It might look a little radical, but it's really what I think. And in fact, it's probably the wisest advice I can give.
maybe a last thought from me then. I'd say, as folks may know, there have been growing concerns over issues like greenwashing and so forth. And I think and also, of course, we have all these new regulations coming forward to make sure you have everything in order and that you do the best job possible. What I would encourage folks who are listening in to do is, on one end, err on the side of action. All of us now have to begin measuring our emissions. And of course, measurement plays a role, but at the end of the day, measurement only matters if it leads to more emission reduction actions taking place. And so I'd say, if you're trying to make sense of how to allocate resources, I would err on the side of putting more of those resources toward reducing your emissions and taking actions to do that. And then at the end of the day, having that documentation in place so that if and when anybody raised questions about what did you do to reduce emissions, you have the ability to communicate the evidence, the proof that you did in fact take actions. You're proud of them. Of course, there's more that we all can do, but really not to make the perfect and fully comprehensive plan necessarily the enemy of at least getting started and doing some good. And so thanks again for having me today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for joining us. If you have any follow-up questions or would like our help in connecting you with either Doug or Alexis, please feel free to go to our website or LinkedIn or email Brad on our membership team. We would love to stay in touch. And as Doug mentioned, we will be sending out follow-on material to this webinar, so be on the lookout for that as well. But thank you to everyone, and thanks especially to Doug and Alexis for your time and your insights. We really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thanks for setting this up. Thanks so much for the great, paneling.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.